Welcome to the Improvising Life podcast, where we explore how life can be more livable. This is Lloyd Crawford, your host. Hello and welcome back. So this is the third time that I'm recording this, and usually I don't start over, edit, but things just weren't feeling right about the last one, but I'm feeling like I've allowed enough space and pause for the message to come through, whereas I've noticed the past few weeks now that Mercury's more active and touching keyboards and wanting to eat things, like that. I'm trying to rush in the moments when I can, if she's with her dad or occupied or something, and so realizing that I was in this moment again, I'm trying to control things. So after allowing time and space to connect with what was going on for me and what message wanted to come through, I'm hopeful that the timing and all the things that want to be expressed will be expressed. So thank you for joining me. And it's so funny too, because this episode is really about the power of our stories, how they're so valid because of the impact on us, and also what can be possible when we're able to have room for new evidence or new stories, almost like a new co-author, right? And so what has been happening the past week for me is, perhaps as I was, practicing and making room for new evidence, the old evidence was kind of gripping tighter, right? It was like, I don't want to go. What? I've been here unopposed for a while. I sort of like this here, Didn't have to do much. I just got to keep swirling around and being hotshot, whatever. And so, this is a moment of grace for myself. So, it seems very, see here, Teddy's little toes. But it just seems very that I would be having some challenge, voicing this week. And so, yeah, it's nice to have that come out, which is, not something that I prepared or anything. But, the way that stories sort of come to be, I like to say sometimes we get unhelpful help, right? That's when people are just saying or doing really problematic things towards us, but we are expected to take it as okay or normal, or that just we don't know any different. And so we end up oftentimes getting stories that aren't really ours. We weren't the author, right? And so each event that we go through, there's what actually factually happened, right? Which I'm not even sure if anyone necessarily knows that, you could maybe, if everything was videotaped, you could rewatch, whatever. But each person involved in something will have their own perspective, right? And then we also then have the stories that end up happening when we are making sense of what happened or reliving it. And oftentimes the way that, life is lifing, we're told to just keep moving on, put your shoulder down and push through and all these things that, aren't helpful. So we're not actually processing things. So often we aren't able to be intentionally writing the stories for ourselves that go with certain aspects of our life, right? It sort of goes into our mental space or our subconscious, and then it ends up sort of having to write itself based off of the other stories that exist from other events or other areas in our life, right? So we can end up really viscerally experiencing these sort of themes in life of oh, this type of thing seems to happen often, or oh, it's always me against everyone else. And those stories are so valid in that is what we're experiencing, and that's the weight we're carrying, and the sorrow, whatever sort of emotional sort of book filings, right? Or the Dewey Decimal System of not feeling good code that each story gets, right? And so that, I don't want to trivialize that is so real, because that's what we're experiencing. And also there's just that reality as well that we don't often have access to, that we didn't get to write the stories. We didn't get to dissect them necessarily or even read them and be like, oh, actually, I want to put this as horror. This is in drama and suspense. Or this was actually a time that I stood up for myself. I know it looked from everybody else that, I didn't really win that argument, but I tried. And normally I don't try. We don't necessarily have access to that space. And so what happens if we do start to have access to that space? How can we start to have a different relationship with our stories, right? Because what can happen, it definitely is happening for me this week as well, is that sometimes our stories act as evidence that something isn't possible, right? So for most of my life, I'm 31, most of my life, literally like at least 29 years, the stories that I have about my body and my relationship with my body is that my body can't do anything. Right? I mean, this goes back to one of my very first memories. In kindergarten, we were living in Germany. My parents were in the military. And I had a wonderful kindergarten teacher, but she decided we were going to have a field day, right? And normally that'd be like, yeah, it's field day. We're kids. Woo! Give me the ice pops. I don't know if we had ice pops in Germany. I'm not saying they don't exist, but I don't know if that's what we had that day. And we had this amazing playground, right? It was like one of those ones where if you ever drove by it as a kid, you'd be like, whoa, is that a castle, right? And again, I was like 4, so maybe it's not that big. But from memory, if we're going to hold down to that part of the story, that the playground was just fabulous, right? High slides, a bunch of different sort of like steeple heights of the like platforms you could run around to. And so I was excited, but then I didn't get a part of the sort of field day relay race that we were doing at the end that had anything to do with the playground. So I was like, oh, what? I don't get to go down the slide or run around. I got the job at the end of popping the balloon. For context, I was a very, 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 very large child. By elementary school, I weighed twice as much as my sister, who was 4 years older. So just for context, I was a very round child. So perhaps my teacher was like, and I wasn't as proportionately large by kindergarten, but in German standards, I probably was. And so my teacher probably thought that they were doing something kind by not having me be running around the castle and doing all the things, even though that would have been so much fun. Probably thought, oh, pop the balloon at the end. It's pretty easy. Lori's a sweet child. I don't want her to be upset, whatever, So great intentions. Reality, not so much. So, our team was winning, and the last person runs off the playground, picks up the balloon. They had to, hand it to me or something, or, I could pick up the balloon once they ran past me, right? So I pick up the balloon, and I start trying to pop it, and this bitch will not pop. I mean, I was ripping at it with fingernails. I was, elbow dropping it. Everyone started yelling, sit on it. I have it on the ground. I'm, literally flopping on it. I am using probably 100 pounds of, maybe 80 pounds of 4-year-old at this point, right? Dropping the shit out of this balloon, and it does not pop. I mean, does not pop. I was literally balloon myself trying to pop a balloon. I was smashing the shit out of it, and it just somehow kept morphing shape, right? It was I'm here, I'm great, look, I'm a balloon, let's celebrate. It had no ounce of fucks to give that I was being ridiculed by other kindergartners of how can't you pop that, you're so big, right? So the other team at this point had probably they had caught up and finished and won probably 2 minutes ago, and I'm still trying to pop this balloon, right? Still. And the other kid was that's a loud snort in the microphone. The other child would literally did a half of an elbow drop and then popped, right? So I'm okay, at this point, I don't think I have a balloon. I think I have the world's strongest Teflon sack. I don't even know what the fuck I had, but it was not a balloon. So my teacher comes over to try and help out. So while I'm trying to bounce on it, I'm sitting on it, she tries to pop it with her pen, and it doesn't even pop for her. Literally, this balloon was not poppable. The rest of the day, it did not get popped. This was in 1994. I guarantee that balloon still fucking exists somewhere, and it hasn't even started getting shrivelly. It's just fucking there, okay? So I still like to say that story, and you can tell by how long that went. I think it's like a 3-minute story for probably like a 20-second, event. That was such a strong piece of evidence that still to this day I'm unpacking, as you can tell, that my body isn't able to do things that it needs to do, right? My body is a cause of disappointment. My body is a cause of distress. My body just lets me down, right? And so when that evidence, right, that feels like evidence, like my story, like that reality that I've experienced through the story, when that evidence is shouting the loudest, it's also stopping me from experiencing so many other things, right? Like I've never once tried to do a cartwheel, even as a child, because it's like, if I can't pop a balloon, how the fuck am I going to do a cartwheel? Like, well, one, I don't get the mechanics of a cartwheel. I'm like, I'm just supposed to like leap in the air upside down and expect my arms to save me. Like the fuck? I have long, really long boat arms, with dislocating shoulders, crappy wrist, and I'm large. Like, I don't even get the concept of what that would be like. Like I just my body viscerally stops. Like I don't know if you've ever seen someone like run towards a diving board or like something to jump off, and then their like body just locked up. Like that's what happens, right? And so while these are like sort of not petty, like just low level examples, there's so much more in my body like that evidence has stopped me from doing. It stopped me from appreciating my body. It stopped me from nourishing it well. It has stopped me from understanding that movement is something that is vital to everyone, and every single body has a way that it enjoys and feels rewarded through movement, right? And so when I started in 2019, I believe, before COVID, 2019, my anti-racist and social justice yoga teacher training, my friend, hey Carrie, had been asking me since her cohort, so for 3 years after that, of like telling me every time I was about to start, like, hey, do you want to join? Do you want to join? And I just want to respond. Until she finally was like, hey, I'm like sensing some major aversion energy. Like, what's up? And I told her, I was like, it's not anti-racist training. It's not the social justice training. That's actually the reasons why I do consider it. It's the fact that you're asking me to be a part of something that means I have to spend 200 hours with my body. I've already spent a lifetime with it. Why the fuck would I intentionally want to spend time with it where I'd have to acknowledge it, right? Because at this point, I'd felt like a walking head up until now. And so, but because of the loving way she called me in and I knew it did so much for her life and her relationships and how she could show up and even how she was able to have that conversation, which could have been very confrontational if I didn't like trust and understand where she was coming from, And so I decided to meet with Miss Felicia Savage Friedman, who is the founder and facilitator and just overall joyfully wonderful person of liberation, for all. That's not her official title, but oops. But yeah, and so I met with her. And so I'm sharing my concerns, all these things, and she just stops and she says, Lori, if you make yourself any smaller, I won't be able to see you. So despite being 5'10", 220 pounds, I was making myself so small of a human to act as if I didn't exist, because I didn't really feel like I should. I didn't think I had a body that made it okay for me to be taking up space. So much space, right? So much space. So much space, and I can't even do anything in that space, right? And so that loud as fuck evidence that I have a bad body, my body can't do things, my body shouldn't be seen, was stopping me from, one, having any access to my humanity, from doing something as carefree as going outside with a tank top on, from wanting to even like acknowledge that I was in discomfort or like needed a massage as Teddy's working out his feelings on his dog bed. And also just want to add the caveat too that the way I tried to be in control of things for much of my teens and 20s was to really obsessively sort of like work out and try to look better, right? So my body hasn't always remained the larger size, right? I had gotten down to an unhealthy for my weight and frame size weight in high school and for most of college. And even then it just was like, because again, that didn't shift my relationship with my body. It just made the evidence and stories louder because again, the story was like, I'm all you have, right? That's all I could have access to. And I didn't have the toolkit or an understanding that those stories needed to shift, that new evidence needed to come in, right? Instead of contorting and harming my body into trying to visibly be like, see, that those things don't exist anymore. I wasn't actually able to create new evidence. And so what do we do about that? How did I get from there to a point now where I can at least respect my body, where when those stories start to be loud and I start to feel less kind towards my body, how can new evidence come in? What does that look like? For me, the first major step was that yoga teacher training. It was our first weekend of training. Each weekend was 20 hours. And I would maybe been in a plank position for literally 5 fucking seconds. I just started. My wrists were already going. My whole body's just like, this is exactly what we were afraid of. Why the fuck did you do this? I was 5 seconds into it. And if I recall correctly, this thought just came through of this is exactly why you need to be here. Because Miss Felicia was cueing too of honor what your body needs. If it needs to not be using your palms, if you need to use your fists, if you need to modify, all these things are possible. And my body literally was like, there's always been a way that we can coexist. There's always been a modification that we could make to how we're interacting with each other. Not trying to forcibly modify what I look like as your body, but modify your mind and how you're respecting me as your body. And, of course I didn't hear that whole preamble with words. That'd been pretty cool. But there was just this knowingness suddenly as I started to allow my body to be the loudest voice, right? Allow my body to speak louder than the evidence that my mind has been shouting at that point for 29 years. And so through that practice of acknowledging that my body had something to share, and that I could say, mind, I see how you're trying to keep me safe, and also you don't have to go through life alone anymore. That was a very large theme in life that still comes up to this day. That's really ancestral, right? This goes back generations. Both sides of my family have this idea of we have to go it alone, which just isn't true, right? And so through that practice, I was able to build a different foundation where I'm able to have room for adjustment, for flow, and really this to have supportive resources be more accessible. And sometimes supportive resources and the idea of building new evidence is I noticed I've been, I'm not breastfeeding anymore in this exact moment, and yet I'm still slouched over a bit like I was posture wise when I was trying to hold up a 17-pound baby and type with one hand to get work done, okay, I can rearrange my body. That feels a lot better. Hey body, thanks for giving me a cue, right? Other times it's really about taking that first step towards literally just asking, how can I check in with myself? And right now, this week, I'm hosting what I'm calling Facing Your Feelings Friendsy. And, it's sure, it's sort of a challenge, but in terms of like what people would call like, oh, my 1 week challenge. But to me, it's like a precursor to my mini course that I'm launching next week called Yes and Yesterday. And it's really a first step of practices of like, how can I just start to check in with my face? So it uses a practice I call Face to Feels, right? So it's like, we're so often asked like, how are you doing? And we just have our automatic, very mental space response. Mine is always fine, and you? And a lifetime of saying fine and you to like not only mask that I wasn't fine, but like it means I didn't actually know how to check the fuck in. So when I created this tool activity, like based off of some of my experiences in improv classes, I was like, oh shit, that's where I've got it all wrong this whole time. I don't need to start with my mind and ask how I'm doing. You know, like what if my body can be part of what starts that conversation? So if I start by making the face of how I'm feeling, words can come after that, right? I don't have to start like my check-in with already knowing how the fuck I'm doing. If I did that, I wouldn't need to check in, right? So by starting with my face, it's this ability to like just start to move energy, right? Because what happened for so much of my life, and I'm sure someone has experienced this, you know, like it's too strong of an experience to have only happened to me, right? But after so long of having this type of relationship with my body, energy stopped moving. Not only because I stopped physically moving my body, but like there's so much energetic clutter built up because I wasn't voicing my actual needs. I didn't know how to check in with myself. I wasn't physically moving my body. I was not nourishing my body or eating in ways that even felt good. I just, you know, accepted that headaches were normal, emergent poos were just what's going to happen all the time. You know, like it was like I was punishing, subconsciously okay with punishing my body and having experiences that felt really, really horrid. Because that's what my body deserves if it's going to be this body that I have. Like this exact body. Like this body needs to know that there's something wrong with it. So I'm going to let all the things feel wrong with it. And so, you know, that first practice of checking in with my face, again, that was the first step, and it helped start to build new evidence. Again, it was like, I don't have to already know how I'm doing to check in. And by starting to move that energy, suddenly those piles of clutter started to like reduce in size, right? There was fewer like sort of dusty corners I was afraid to look in. I suddenly was able to build new evidence of like, shit, my body's been holding on to all of this for so long, and it actually is like pretty fucking rad, and also can share out a whole lot of wisdom because it's just been waiting for me to shut the fuck up and have a time and space to share, right? And you know, I know we're getting towards the time for this episode, but I think this will lead into what I'll share out next week perhaps. But if I hadn't been able to start with that practice of like face to feels, if I hadn't been able to go and be in yoga teacher training with someone who approaches it in such a humanized way and really stresses listening to our bodies and having the practice that we're meant to have, despite what someone else is cueing in a space, for example, there is absolutely no fucking way that I would have had access to the type of pregnancy that I had access to, or had the type of birth and delivery process that I had access to. Nor would I have had been able to be so in tune with and amazed with my body throughout those two major experiences in my life, and to be able to navigate my postpartum experience with the amount of grace and patience and understanding as I have. So from that ability to, you know, even just start with my face, or to acknowledge when there's just a small posturing thing that I can shift in my body that allows it to know like, hey, I feel you, I hear you. I may not have the energy or the capacity right now to do more, but here's what I can do. That allowed there to be that new evidence, and that new evidence directly ended up like directly impacting the quality of life, and literally like the quality of life that I was able to bestow upon my daughter already, right? And so I just want to sort of wrap up by sharing, it's like, you know, so how do you start? How do you take that first step? How do you even imagine that there's a foundation that can exist where something is more accessible to you? First is, you know, just the awareness that there are stories that are over time cataloged in our minds and our beingness, right, as evidence, as hard facts. What if they aren't so definitive? What if we can have this idea that stories can have chapters and a different chapter is possible? If you could take one accessible step right now today to acknowledge what story is shouting the loudest to you, what would that step be? What kind of support might you need for that step? Could that be journaling? Could that be calling a friend, asking a therapist, just staring at the mirror until finally the thoughts can come up? Can that be moving your face and emoting what you're feeling? Can that be picking an emoji and being like, this is the theme of my life right now? How does that feel? And then if you're feeling like the next step is like, and so what do I do with this awareness? Voicing out, like, what is that evidence, that shouting voice stopping me from doing or accessing or being able to experience? And holding yourself in a tender space there of like, gosh, shit, there's something I just want to experience so much. And now I'm able to see how that really loud, outdated, had help getting it, doesn't feel supportive story or evidence is directly impacting my ability to experience this other thing, right? That is doing more than enough, because that is going to start shifting that energy, right? Oftentimes we get in this sort of white supremacy, whiteness culture race of like, oh gosh, everything is urgent, I have to do it by myself immediately or I'm a failure again. Like, no, let's just take a fucking pause. That is doing more than enough. Like taking that step of saying, shit, this is a story that feels so binding, and I would really love my next chapter to include this instead. And holding that space, asking someone to support you holding that space. And so the one final question that I want to leave with you, and I think this might be where we pick up next week, is what part of my story wants to revisit with which parts of me? You know, and sort of these smaller themes that we're discussing these next few weeks are also coming from this episode with Sarah Steckler. So if you haven't listened to episode 13, I invite you to go back and do that, because I'm sort of having, again, this new podcast structure of we have one interview beginning of the month, and then I reflect back on certain elements and then, you know, just share from that place. So, yeah, this was like perhaps a heavier episode when you're like listening, because we went to some places, but we can't access what feels lighter if we don't acknowledge the heaviness we've been carrying, right? And not just like a weight heaviness, but just like the energetic residue that just like clogs our fucking shit up, right? And so I'm sending you, you know, off into the woods, no, but with like this loving kindness, right? Of like, it's totally okay that we each have these stories that feel stifling, and also we don't always have to only be on that chapter, right? What if there's something else available for us and we just haven't been able to access it? Thank you so much for joining, everyone. For any of you who are interested, I will just share out that is can be a self-paced course, the sort of challenge I mentioned, the Face Your Feelings Friendsy. I will link it in the show notes. It's hosted through my Member Vault account, and it's also just leading up to a course called Yes and Yesterday, and I will speak more of that next week, but it's already like up there if you want to check it out or enroll or do any of those things. It's all there, but we will spend more time next week, you know, sort of exploring that, like what part of my story wants to revisit with which parts of me. I think that maybe where we go next week. I want to thank you for showing up in the ways that you did and continue to do, and I am wishing this week brings you some more grace and space and ease. As always, have a razzle-dazzle day, and if that's not accessible, just put an F on front and have a razzle-dazzle day. I'm so grateful that you're here with me.